All right, so this is the second lesson in resources, and we will be looking at the population pyramid. We realize that the population pyramid is a way to show quite a number of things that is happening in the population. What are some of the things that the population pyramid shows? Anybody? What are some things that the population pyramid shows? Nobody doesn't know. All right. So the population pyramid can show the basic thing that it shows is male, female, right? So the number of females, the number of males present in an area. Also, it may indicate the ages of the individuals present in an area. So those are two key features of a population pyramid. So when we look at the next slide, we will be able to see examples of a population pyramid. Yes, so the next slide, right. So this population here now is showing Trinidad and Tobago, 1950, young and growing population, 2010, stable population with fewer children. Why is it that in 1950 it is showing young and growing population? Anybody? Is anybody able to respond to that based on what you're seeing? Why is the population telling us that the population is young and growing? All right, so once we look at the pyramid, we will see the distribution and the age ranges of the persons living in Trinidad and Tobago as of 1950. If we note that the largest percentage of the population is between 0 and 5 years old, right? The smallest percentage of the population is over 85 years old, based on what we are seeing. And the middle range of the population, if we see there, it is about 45, thereabout. So if we look at the pyramid, we realize that there are more young persons in the population than old persons. Significantly more persons are young, so between the ages of 0 to 30, right, than persons who are above 30 going up to 90 years old, right? So that is why we say that the population is young, because it is characterized by a large percentage of individuals who are between the ages of 0 to 20 or 0 to 18. And we realize that it is a growing population because between the ages of 20 to about 45, we realize that most of these individuals would be a part of the workforce, right? Or what we describe as the labor force. Once we touch 45 and over, we recognize that the population, in terms of the large number, begins to depreciate, or it begins to get lower, right? So we realize that the population is young and growing. In 2010 now, we realize that the population is stable with fewer children. So if we look at the population, we realize that no area of the population in terms of distribution of age and gender is larger, significantly larger than any, right? Unlike in 1950, we realized that between the ages of 0 to 10, we had a large gap, a large number of individuals there. But when we look at this population pyramid in 2010, we realize that it is pretty evenly matched in terms of its distribution. So we would describe the population as being stable. And we realize if we look at the 0 to 10 in this instance, we realize that it is not very healthy. So we realize that there are not a lot of children, right? And this may be caused because of low birth rate, based on what we see in the pyramid. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. All right, so the demographic transition. Now, stage one, birth rate and death rates are high. So that's stage one when we're looking at the population. The population is small, infant mortality rate is high, and life expectancy is low. Famine, war, or infectious disease may strike at any time, killing large numbers of the population. And we can see that as indicated by the red bar being or rather the red line being the birth rate, and if we look at the death rate, the line that is blue, right? So we realize that there's a spike of the death rate, right? A rapid spike, which shows that individuals within the society become susceptible to death based on the following factors, which is famine, war, or diseases. So what this is indicating is that there are going to be several factors which may affect the population of a country or of an area, right? And the population of an area will be affected by birth rate, death rate, and of course, migration, right? And migration comes in two forms, emigration and immigration. So the number of persons who are entering, so EM is when people move away to another country. IM, as in immigration, is when they move in from another country, right? So we want to emphasize that these are the things that can affect the population growth. Stage two, better medical care, improve the diet, and the public sanitation bring down the death rate. The birth rate remains high, population increases rapidly. So notice that in the first phase, or in stage one, the birth rate is high, but the death rate is also high. And we know that once the death rate and the birth rate high, the population is not going to grow sharply or rapidly at all, because basically we have the same number of persons dying that are being born, right? So if 10 babies are born and 10 adults die, it simply means that the population isn't growing at all. Yeah? However, when the government now tries to fix the problems and it works, so the government identifies the problem that is taking place in the area, that of the possibility of diseases, famine, right? So in stage 2, we realize that here the government has rectified or solved the problem. So there is better medical care to ward off the diseases. There is improved diet and public sanitation, right? Again, tackling the problem or the issue of diseases as well as the famine. The death rate now begins to go down. If we look in, we will see the blue line going down. Now, when the death rate begins to trend downward, we realize that the population must begin to move upward, indicated by the green area. So the birth rate is constant, yes. The death rate begins to go down. So as a result, the population begins to increase. Notice that when we come to phase 3 or stage 3, the birth rate begins to fall as people choose to have smaller families. The rate of the population slows. So we realize the upward trend in the population, right? So the population was going up because the birth rate was down, the death rate began to decline rapidly, right? And the birth rate was constant. But now that the birth rate in the population begins to go down, we realize that the population in terms of growth, it begins to kind of plateau, it begins to kind of level off, right? And then now at phase 4, we see now the birth rate is low. Most people live to enjoy their old age, but there are many, there are many elderly people. So the death rate does not fall. Some population grows slowly or sometimes decline. So the population here now is stable. The population has gotten old. Not a lot of persons having children, right? So the birth rate goes down. But because the government had initially fixed the problems that was causing the high death rate, which were famines, war, and diseases, we realized that the life expectancy of persons began to increase, right? So we realized that the population is now high and stable because people are living longer, right? Is that clear to everyone?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
All right,
sir.
beautiful.
Yes,
All
sir.
right. Now, how can the government? All right, so let me ask you a question now. So, based on the trends that you have seen in the diagram, in the demographic transition, suggest one strategy that the government may have used to improve the conditions of the population. So one strategy that the government may have used to deal with the problem that the population was faced with in the initial phase. So what was the problem? So we realized that there were wars, diseases, and famines taking place. So as the government, what strategy do you think that the government implemented to ensure that this problem was eradicated? Come on, man, you can't go silent on me
Sorry,
now,
can you
you.
repeat the question, please?
So, based on what we're seeing in the population, right? The population started off very, very low, right? Population falls sharply at stage 1, and then it begins to recover. So, the recovery process must have been something that the government did. So, what kind of strategies do you think that the government used to get the population to increase, right? So that's the question. So what strategies do you think that the government implemented to ensure that there was an increase in the population? So as the government of a country suggests three strategies that you may use to increase the population or to cause the population to grow. Nobody? To Kelly D and Patrice and Smith and no sir, this serious today.
Sir, does it have to do with the way how they manage the finances of a country? Does that have to do with it too?
Definitely. But it's how you explain it, you know.
All right, so you know that money is an important factor. Is that's what used to pay for the basic needs, and if you live with, yeah, that means sir. So once you have money now, and once you're able to properly balance the work, so you know that certain money goes to the health sector, some goes to the growth of the economy, but you build up on. I don't really know how to explain what I think you know what I'm getting.
All right. So a stimulus package. So the government could have implemented a stimulus package, right? What is a stimulus package? It is basically, as you're saying, financial assistance to those areas of the population which would have been suffering because of diseases, right? And we realize that in terms of famine, so a stimulus package would provide that necessary amount of funding to offset the lack of resources in the different areas affected. So now they could get opportunities to purchase items, right? So the government could have done that as one strategy, given the population a stimulus package to ensure that they can now afford their basic needs. And of course, once the population is able to afford its basic needs, then of course we are going to see less death because of famine, because of disease. Very good job, Alasia. Anybody else with another strategy that the government could have implemented?
Sir,
Uh, sir,
Mr. Medical.
sir, like when it comes to like war, there could have
Yeah.
been an implementation of more police force in areas where there would be like gang violence and stuff like that.
All right. So it may be the war is not an external war, but it could be that the war is a civil war. So a civil war is where um, individuals within the country are fighting, right? So the government could have stepped up its um, policing of the different areas to ensure or to minimize the amount of conflict taking place within the country. All right, Brian. Anybody else? All right, so this is one of the challenges that we're having. Persons are unwilling to respond in classes. So we can't remember, it's not a case where we are face to face and we are able to maybe give you some paper to answer a question and then get mark it and give it back. We don't have that option at the moment, right? So the only way we are going to know if you are understanding and will be able to answer the questions is if you speak up during classes. Nobody is seeing you, right? Hardly anybody really knows. I'm sure that of the class, persons don't really know everybody, right? There are at least 50% of the persons on the class that you may not have met before or you don't even talk to. So I'm not sure why you're not responding to me. You need to talk to me so that I know what are the strengths that you have, what are the weaknesses, right? There are some persons, yes, that they write better than how they speak, but consider this an opportunity to now enhance your public speaking without being seen either, because nobody not seeing your face, right? And you need to respond so that you can develop your problem solving skills, right? So this is the problem. The government recognizes that there is famine, there is war, and there is diseases that is causing the death rate to be very high. So what are the strategies that the government, if you are a part of the government, what would you tell the government to implement? Or as the government, what strategies would you implement to ensure that this death rate goes down? What would you do? Talk to me, somebody, man.
Sir, improvement of medical care.
All right, so you would improve medical care. I think also Brown would have said that in the chat. So improvement in medical care. Right, so that is the strategy that you would implement, Jada, right? But now you need to tell me how will this strategy be implemented? I remember now the question is going to ask, say, suggest 3 strategies, right, that the government of a country can implement to allow the death rate to decline. And they're going to ask you to suggest giving full details. So we want you to now give me that full details. Brittany will come to you after we are finished. So I want you to give me now the full details. What are the full details? So you say medical care or health strategies. How will this be done? All right. Think about what is happening in Jamaica today. So we are threatened by COVID-19. Did the government do anything to try and allow this to decline? What were some of the strategies that the government used? You have to be practical, you know. So some of the things that the government used can be a part of this strategy um that you say that you can implement as the government in this case. So talk to me. All right. Does anybody?
Sir, for famine, as the government, I would invest in company like food manufacturing companies
From where?
from our finances
No, no,
from
no. As in, where would these companies be located? Is it in the country,
in the
outside of
country,
the
sir.
country? In the country.
Yes, sir.
All right. So, so you would try to work on the resources available within the country to try and get the manufacturing companies up and running in terms of getting them to be more productive. Good. All right. Um, Let me hear from Brittany Mullins.
Sir, under diseases, to improve medical care,
you could ensure that all children are vaccinated on time. And I don't mean against corona, but like the diseases like hepatitis B and measles, mumps and rubella, etc.
Right. So depending on the type of diseases, the government could go on a vaccination drive to ensure that all newborn, because remember, the birth rate is high enough. But then we want to now ensure that if it is that it is something that is going to affect children, then we try to get them vaccinated against the disease. So maybe like our coronavirus now, they are coming up with a vaccination. So vaccination drive for everybody to ensure that they don't become susceptible to the disease. Very good, Mullins. So don't you think that one of the strategies that the government could implement is trying to get overseas assistance from, so let's say from another country, to give them food, or in terms of medical care? We realize that the government of Jamaica brought about 50 Cuban doctors in the initial, so in March thereabout, to assist with fighting the coronavirus. So these are some of the things that you have to look at. What are the strategies that can be used? All right, so we've done enough of that. Let us move on to the next phase. All right, so population problems, and we've been touching on the population problems thus far. I want each person to tell me one problem that the population of a country may face. So type in the chat, one problem that the population may face. All right, so immigration, unemployment, high birth rates, very good. Come on, man. Lack of job opportunities, crime and violence, good. Yes. Overpopulation, awesome, good. Natural disasters, excellent. Smith, we only want you to do one, not so much. All right. So depletion of natural resources, good. Death, very good. Brittany, it would be a, maybe a high death rate, but we wouldn't necessarily just say death. So it would be maybe like a high death rate, a moderate death rate, but yeah. Anybody else coming in the chat? Talk to me. All right, so lack of proper educational facilities, right? Good, good. All right. All right. So immigration. All right, so we have quite a number. All right, let's go and see how many persons were able to get their example on the board. All right, so population problems. So we have two characteristics in terms of how the population may be moving along. So the population may be high and rising, or it could be low or falling, right? So it may be in two states, or the population may be, as we would have said earlier on, based on the pyramid, stable, right? So with a high and rising population, we are faced with unemployment, shortage of school spaces, shortage of housing, inadequate water supply, farms are subdivided until they are too small to support a family, too many young people migrate to the cities. So that is when the population is high and rising. When a population now is low or falling, then we have few roads or other transport facilities, expensive to transport crops to a distant market, difficult to supply schools, clinics, and electricity for a scattered population, few businesses or employment opportunities. All right. So these are the problems, as in just some of the problems going on, not all of them, just the bare minimum. There would have been others that you would have already highlighted, right? And of course, as Rhea would have mentioned, immigration. So migration would have been one of the things that a population would have been faced with. And migration can be both, can be explained in a negative way and it can be explained in a positive way, because migration may help a country, right? As well as it may be bad for a country. So it may be good for a country, whilst it may be bad for a country. So migration is not always something that is positive. All right, let's move to the next slide. All right. So notice we've been talking about migration for quite some time. We've been touching at it, touching at it, touching at it. All right. So we are going to go a little bit more into it now. So what is migration? Come on, a member of the class, tell me what is migration.
Please. So it's the movement of persons from one location to another.
Right. So pretty simple. So it's a movement of an individual from one place to another place, right? So it may be permanent or it may be temporary. So if I decide to move from with my location now to go into another area of the house, would you say that I have migrated?
No, it's not like I've moved a big deal
But
away
I have
from where you
moved
live
on.
in. So yes,
All right.
but I wouldn't call it migration.
You wouldn't call it migration. All
No.
I'd
right.
call it migration.
All right. All right. So let's go into the definition now. All right. So based on our text and based on the context that we are using the term migration in, the context is important. Remember, the context is always important. So the fact that we are doing social studies, so we would be asking the definition of the term migration in the context of the syllabus, right? And based on the context of the syllabus, we are looking at migration as when people move within a country or between countries, right? So migration is the movement of an individual within a country or the movement of an individual from one country to another country. All right. So once I move from my location anywhere I am in the country, then it would be said that I would have migrated. Now, how do we look at migration in the context that there are many types of migration, right? But let us look at the push and the pull factors first. So, push factors, would you say negative, positive? Which are the negatives and which are the positives? Come now, is the push factor the negative factor? Or is the pull
Sir, the
factor?
push factor is
The push
certain
factor.
negative.
All right, say that again, please. Say that again. All right, so the push factors are those things which cause you to leave, right? So those must be something that is negative, right? And the pull factors are the things that draw you in, that want you to come over. So those would be positive, right? So our negatives, which are our push factors, those things that force us to leave, would be unemployment, low wages, no educational opportunities, restricted society, crime and conflict, natural disasters, pollution. And those factors which would be pulling us or drawing us, right, are job opportunities, higher earnings, good schools, universities, social opportunities, entertainment, sport, peaceful surroundings, safe and clean environment. So those would be all of our pull factors, which would be those things which are positive. Good. Now we would not have done all of the factors, right? So we have just listed a few of them, but there are more. Okay? So can you now type in the chat one push factor? Type in the chat one push factor. So in the chat, one push factor. All right. High crime rate, bad health services, pollution, crime and violence. Good. All right. So those are the, all right. Okay. Natural disasters, low wages. All right. So let me hear now the pull factors, lack of job opportunities. Those are already, you are most of your listing the same things that are already on screen. Let me hear some of the pull factors now. Good infrastructure, free education. All right, good. High wages. High wages is already on the thing, it says higher earnings, so that is already there. Good economic system. All right, so we get we getting the idea, but most of you still listing what is already on the screen in just saying it in another way, but that's okay. All right, so once we get the idea that these are push these are the push factors, and we know the pull factors different. All right, let's move to the next slide. Right, climatic conditions may also affect migration. All right, internal migration now. So what is internal migration? So we know that it is movement within a specific geographic area, right? So it's movement within a specific geographic area, specific country, right? So movement within a country. That is what internal migration is. What are the types of internal migration now? So what are the types of internal migration? Type in the chat. Let me see who knows what's happening. What are the types of? So we have urban to urban, rural to urban, and rural to rural. Very good. Sparks. So we have urban to urban, rural to rural, urban to rural, rural to urban. Right? So does anyone know how to explain each of the concepts? So do you know how to explain rural to rural? So let's say a rural area in Manchester now is South Manchester. So South Manchester, right, is a rural area, right? In Clarendon, in some parts of eastern Clarendon, would be another rural area. So if I leave South Manchester and go to eastern Clarendon, which is a rural area, then I would have made the transition from a rural area to another rural area. Good. If I leave Montego Bay and I go to Kingston, that is urban to urban. If I leave South Manchester and I go to Kingston, that is rural to urban. If I leave Montego Bay and I come to South Manchester, that is urban to rural. Good. All right, let's move on, see what's happening on the next slide. All right, so 20th century. So migration to the capital city in search of jobs and opportunities. Return flow, migration back to rural areas, for example, on retirement. Today, migration to suburban areas with land for new residential development. And we realize that we would say like in parts of St. Catherine, New Harbor area would be like that. So you have, and also in areas of Mandeville, we would say that Mandeville is like a suburban area because it's not totally urban, right? So it's suburban because there is a high percentage of agricultural land, which is still being used in Mandeville today. Many Caribbean cities are now losing population. And of course, we realize that because most persons end up overseas. They're going overseas. Let's move to the next slide. Urbanization. So urbanization is an increase in the proportion of the population living in towns and the cities. In many countries, cities are still growing rapidly because of migration and urbanization. So urbanization occurs when individuals who are living in a rural area move from the rural area to go to this urban center or the urban cities, the urban towns. That's what urbanization is. So when you pack up your bag, or what we see happening in Jamaica predominantly is that For most persons who go to the University of the West Indies, University of Technology, Maritime University, MICO, um, and other areas, once they go to these areas to study, a high percentage of them still remain because of the job opportunities that exist and so on, right? So instead of returning to their country life or their rural lifestyle, they remain in these urban areas. All right, let us move again. Next, next slide. All right. So when we come back to the next class, this is where we will pick up Caribbean migration. And I expect that at the next class, we will hear from the persons who we did not hear from today, right? So we will hear from Amira, we will hear from Joy and Robinson, we'll hear from Makeda, we'll hear from Matthew, we'll hear from Rashana, and we will hear from Shakil. So those persons who we didn't hear from today, a lot, we should expect that at the next class, we'll be hearing from you. All right. So it's now 4:38.